Thanks, lady.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here we are. I'm not going to start the AI companion. AI is disturbing to me as well. So I'm
It
disturbed by a lot of
is.
things.
It's just try not to
There's a
cuss
whole
though.
other ball of wax to have to chip away at.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest beef with AI right now, if I can just go into it because it's eccentric, but nobody has tried a nostalgia revival of that flippin' little paperclip from Microsoft, right?
Oh,
Like the least you got all these AI things,
yeah.
and you go for some sexually provocative anime type character. Put the paperclip guy back.
Yeah, right.
Unassuming, fat bald guy, not up to anything, but it's actually a superpowered AI bot. Like, looks like you're trying to write a letter, you know? Looks like you're trying to
Just a
evade your
paperclip.
taxes.
Yeah,
Please
right.
give me your
Exactly.
information.
Yes. So this is
Anyway,
another episode of the Silmarillion Sessions here, and Dr. Thompson and myself,
that's right.
um, Mr. Lassiter. And we're going to be looking today, right? It's Smith, a Wooten Major, as well as at this chapter of the coming of men into the West and the Silmarillion. But I want to start with the Smith, Wooten Major. That's where I'd like to start.
Yes. And if I might offer that for those who are not familiar with Smith and Wooden Major, it doesn't matter because you don't know anyway. Those who are familiar with Smith and Wooden Major say, well, what the hell do these two have to do with each other? You guys just randomly pick two things. And you would be correct. However, it also happens to be that is it not exactly the same thing? When Smith goes into Fairy, he is the man coming into the way. He is man.
Yeah.
And in many ways, these two can actually illumine each other. Coming the men into the West, obviously, is the Elvish Chronicle about the experience of these strange, hairy beasts that come in smelling of milk and evidently have a lifespan, shelf life, and they go bad. Whereas Smith of Wood Major is the humans side of the story of wandering into Elfland, encountering, learning speech in a manner of speaking. He learns to sing, to dance with the fairy queen, and so on. It's not it's not a one-to-one, but in terms of the phenomenon, the experience of the encounter between man, the mortal human being, and that which is beyond, into
Yeah.
fairyland, into the Elfland. There are two different perspectives on that same boundary transgression, if we can call it
That that's interesting. That's a really interesting point. I had not actually planned that, so I will pretend like I am planning this from the top down, but I hadn't planned that. But you're right. At this point in the Silmarillion, we actually start. We don't end the involvement of the elves, but we do introduce this new element of humanity. And now humans and elves are involved in the struggles in Middle Earth against Sauron and against Morgoth. So it is very much this image of man, a man coming into that fairy realm. And I think there's actually a line, Scott, sorry, in the Silmarillion where they talk, I think it's on the next page here. I'm going to flip the page, where they talk about how they came into this land because they thought it was a place that didn't seem to have a lot of grief in it, I think is what the word is. Um,
Yeah.
where was it? It is said that these men had long dealings with the dark elves, so on and so forth. It was not long thereafter. So Beor is talking with Felagund in this, and Beor says he won't say much about what happened back in the land of Osirian, I think was where they came from. He does say,
Yeah.
though, that a darkness lies behind us, and we have turned our backs upon it, and we do not desire to return thither even in thought. Westwards our hearts have been turned, and we believe that there we shall find light. So that idea that if they're going west into the land of the elves, they're going to find more light. There's that. Um, oh yes, and here it is at the top. Indeed, they believed at
I'm gonna.
first that Felagund was of the Valar, of whom they had heard
Mm,
rumor that they dwelt far in the west. And this
mm.
was, some say, the cause of their journeying to come into the west. Um, and then there's another part too, yeah, where they're talking about wanting to be away from the shadow that they had experienced.
Yeah.
Um, let's see.
So, so they're being drawn in some way towards the light. They've heard rumor of the Valar.
Yeah.
And that's why they're moving west. Oh, where do you come from? What's it like back there? Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
There was a tree, there
Yeah.
was a snake, things were involved, people died, or whatever.
Yeah.
We just,
And,
it's, I
and
don't talk about it.
horribly. It's almost like for them, it's the desire to escape from the darkness into this light realm of the
Right.
elves, but they don't know the elves have been at war for many, many
Right.
generations
I
before
guess that's
this.
a very interesting thing is, they come across, and so what we know is that the fundamental thing, what is the darkness that the men are fleeing from? Because this is proto-humanity. This is our world. It's
Hmm.
not a different world, so it's not far for us to reach and say, well, it's the fall. Well, remember
Yeah.
that for ancient Anglo-Saxons, as for ancient Near Eastern, early Near Eastern Christians, pre-Christian tradition as well, the fall wasn't so much just Adam and Eve. The big that wasn't a big catastrophe, right? It was like a fumble. They were kicked out, but God was still with them, right? The big catastrophe, actual crisis that rent humanity in two, and people begin to live in darkness and fear afterwards, is the kinslaying, right? Is Cain slaying Abel? Like that's the big
Yeah.
tragedy. Like that's the big tragic rift, and so then we can simply look at it, and you see that the fratricide myth is a very common, right, among many. So it's a very simple step to say there's some sort of kinslaying, is this darkness that is trailing humanity, um, and that is an exact mirror. If we use the mountains there as the y-axis, is exactly what folks like Galadriel are carrying with them. She comes because we
Yeah.
just read this cycle where she comes in, she's hanging out with Thingol, and it's like, hey, so what have the Noldor been up to, crossing the ice and all that crazy stuff? That sounds like a weird vacation to take. And she's like, things happened. What are you talking about? Right? There's a similar kind of baggage there. So anyway, we again, maybe this is that happen that this thing happening at a higher level with the elves happens at a lower level with beings in some
Oh, I think
respect.
absolutely. Yeah, I
But in
think
another
absolutely.
respect, we see a geographical mirroring, which is why it was important to have laid out the land of Beleriand and its realms and all of that in a recent chapter.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider too, which I think is a parallel between these two stories, is that um, there's a passage in the Smith and Wooten Major where it talks about how Smith, who's the main character and goes into the fairyland,
That's right.
experiences the best things first and the gentle creatures and the happy places, but he only gets a hint that there are actually very dangerous things in that realm. When there's a scene where he fights the wind is hunting him, it says,
Yes.
and he actually survives because he clings to a tree, and the tree tells him to leave, to get out of there, because there are dark things in that land that he has not yet faced. I think it's a
Right.
similar thing here, that the men who come over from Assyrian to the realm of the elves, they think that they're coming into a realm that is, as it says here, they had escaped from all perils and come at last to a land without fear. But we've already seen in the previous chapters that's just not true. That's there's
Right.
there's plenty. The elves themselves were terrified they were getting snatched away by Morgoth in the night. They've been
Mm-hmm.
fighting this guy, and they've seen betrayals already, and kinslaying and all this. So the men haven't yet experienced that there are actually very dangerous things in this realm too.
Right.
Um, I think perhaps maybe both point to something that Tolkien was insisting upon even in his letter about elves, about fairyland, where he talked about how fairyland is not heaven. It is not the same thing as heaven.
Right.
And this is very much in contrast to a lot of the 19th century and early 20th century writers about this, who thought that fairyland was just cute little naked babies frolicking about in the wilderness, and fat fairies with flowers on them, and it's very very treacly, very saccharine. And
Right.
for Tolkien, that's not true. He says this is an alternate realm. It's a secondary world, really. I think he would say.
And that's just it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's, in a similar way, I think there's criticisms of Christianity, so-called atheist criticisms of Christianity about the idea of heaven is just a projection of
Mm,
this childhood fantasy of fairyland. But they're two fundamentally different things. And even fairyland isn't, it's not the Big Rock Candy Mountain. I mean,
right.
Uh, it's a perilous realm. I mean, that's the thing. It's
Hmm.
dangerous, which is why, and likewise, the sacred mysteries of the sacred mysteries are kept sacred. They're kept secret. They're kept safe. They're not shared for just anybody because it's not safe.
Hmm.
You draw too close to holy things, you might get zapped
Yeah,
by.
right, exactly. Yeah,
You know,
right.
it's like grabbing onto a high tension wire. Like, don't
Yeah,
say that.
yeah.
So that's why they keep the mysteries sacred and behind veils and behind, rune screens and iconostases happening.
Hmm.
And in a parallel way, but it's not the same thing, is it? It's not the same thing, but a parallel way. This idea of there's a mist between these worlds, between this world and that world, fairy, right? And it's another created world. It's another branch on Yggdrasil, but it's
Mm.
not the same as the eternal heavens, right? That's a different thing.
That's a good analogy. For folks that are not familiar with Yggdrasil or Yggdrasil, the tree, the great tree, the Norse said, the great tree upon which all the worlds rest, has all these different realms. And if you've seen, if you've seen in pop culture the Thor movie with the Dark Thunder or Vengeance or whatever the heck it's called, I forget what it is. But he fights the giants, but he fights them in their own realm, which is Niflheim, if I remember right. And you have Jotunheim. No, Jotunheim was the giants,
Jotunheim,
and Niflheim was the I think the dwarves or something like that. Svartheim
yeah,
was the dwarves. But the point being is that there are all these different realms within Yggdrasil, and you
yeah,
go from one to the next at your peril. It's a dangerous
right,
thing to do. And I think that's part of what we get here when the men come here into the realm of Beleriand, if I'm getting the title right, and they
mhm,
discover that it's not at all paradise. It's not paradise on earth. It's lovely, it's beautiful, it's otherworldly, but it's not paradise on earth. And it's also not magical, which is also interesting to me that they discover very quickly this is not magical in the way that they think. Much like when Sam and Frodo
mhm,
in Lord of the Rings say to Galadriel, "Do some magic." She's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean magic?"
right,
um, and for her, magic is just it's the ordinary. It's that seeing mirror that she creates for them to look into. But
mhm,
that's not magic. That's just ordinary. That's what you do when you're in that realm. So
right,
let me back up for a minute though. Let me ask you with this story of Smith of Wooten Major,
yeah.
what was it? You said you wanted to even teach a class on him. You see it as almost like an unmined territory in
Oh,
a
yeah,
way.
absolutely, absolutely. It's on mine. Most people don't. They're not even aware of it. I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna start by saying, I'll describe my thoughts about a different story of his, um, and that's the former Giles of Ham.
Oh
Former
yeah.
Giles of Ham, I think, is an untapped resource.
Mm.
Brilliant, but it's very surface level. I mean, it's below the surface, but it's pit mining, right? Okay, right. I think that is underappreciated. When it comes to Smith of Wood Major, I think that's a deep mine. It's a deep
Mhm.
mine that can yield rich treasures,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That in some ways you can't delve too deeply or too greedily when it comes to Smith of Witten Major, or rather, you can't. But when you do dig deeply and perhaps greedily, you do so at your own peril, which is exactly what we see happen in the story. And it
Yeah.
could kill you,
Yeah.
but it could also lead to the same places that it leads Smith.
Yeah. Because they're
So,
Balrogs. They're Balrogs. That's the whole point. The whole thing that he brings
and
up in Lord of the
even
Rings, right?
yes, there are that's precisely it. The dwarves went down in some ways, you might say, uninitiated. They went down unprepared. Um, yeah, and woke a Balrog and couldn't deal with them. And Gandalf went down there with the Balrog as his companion. And as soon as they got down there, the Balrog said, "I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. There are bigger, meaner things down here than me." And Gandalf's like,
That's
"I'm coming
right.
with you, buddy. We'll finish this
Yeah.
outside."
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because they come both from beyond, but there are these deep chthonic powers that lie beneath the earth that,
Mm,
to which a Balrog is just an annoying horsefly.
yeah, right.
Um, and so I think in the same way, and they're not all, yeah, it's not to say that they're necessarily evil either. They're just more powerful in the way that you're more powerful than a little red mite finally packing up his bags and going on an adventure. And you
Yeah,
buy, you
right.
just, you just lean against the wall and just, the guy's nothing but a red splat.
Gosh, the guy.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
So Smith of Wood Major, rich. I think Tolkien poured a lot of his wisdom into this.
yeah.
I think there's really a lot there, many levels, lots of symbolism, highly concentrated in that way. I think it's very condensed. A lot of what we find in the Silmarillion in Lord of the Rings as well.
I was reading, just to do a little legwork on this, which is one of those things that I do because I'm weird. I was reading in this article here, which is the official site of the Tolkien estate, Verlin Flieger on the
Oh,
Smith of Wood Major. And what they're saying here is that apparently the story started as a introduction to George MacDonald's The Golden
hmm,
Key. And he started to write it, and then I guess he abandoned it because he saw even in The Golden Key by MacDonald, he saw this tendency to be more saccharine, as it says.
yeah,
He was trying to illustrate what he felt was a popular misconception of fairy stories as saccharine and for children. That's something he directly contradicts in his On Fairy Stories essay, that
right.
what we call fairy stories are normally written in a very saccharine way, and everybody thinks, oh, this is for children. Tolkien was of the opinion that they're not at all. They're actually, or they should be, stories about these, as you said, chthonic powers, these deep powers, and things that have reality in the world.
Mhm.
And anyway, that's why he wrote the story. And apparently it was at the end of his, or near the end of his life, I guess, 67, I think it was published. Does that sound right to you?
Mm,
Right around there?
it could be. I think it says just above
Does
the
it?
the fold on this. Yeah.
Uh,
No, that's I don't know. Maybe somewhere I thought I saw a number in
I
the
skipped
scrolling
it.
there, but I
I
could
might
be
have skipped it.
mistaken.
Um,
Um, but yeah, I believe that's true. I believe that's true.
Here it is.
And it is very different. 67, right on.
Yeah, okay.
And he's the ostensible beginning, I guess the obvious aim at the beginning is to lambast the whole notion that, fairy stories are for children. That's cute, that's sweet, that's saccharine, because it opens with a tale about a cake, and the guy
Yeah,
who's making the cake is like, "Oh, it's for kids. It's pretty fun. We'll put a little cute little fairy princess on there,"
yeah, yeah.
and his assistant, who we find out is more than what he appears to be, is like, you don't should mess with things like that, but you don't really know what you're talking about, but okay. So we're gonna put this magic star in there, and things are gonna happen. Oh, sure, things are gonna happen. Kids are gonna have a great time. Okay, you're the boss. And it goes from there. But then that really only begins. That's only this. It is very beautifully. It's the seed that's planted because it is, in fact, it's a magical star that's put in the cake, according to the pastry chef, the head cook, as a gimmick, essentially. But it begins the unfolding. It releases a sort of magic into
Yes.
into it, and somebody consumes that magic and then becomes touched and changed for that. But it's a seed being planted, isn't it? I mean, the seed that's planted into the cake, which then becomes planted into the boy who eats that particular piece of cake,
Right. Right.
and he becomes sort of a spiritually a green man, right? The things sprout out of his mouth.
But yeah, there's a lot happening. What you just, I mean, you're just describing the plot here, but there's a lot happening in that. First off, this character that helps out the incompetent cook, Noakes,
Yes,
is revealed
notes.
later to be the elf king. He's the king of the elves. But if you're
Yes,
savvy and you know language, that's given away immediately because his name is
is
Alf,
elf,
which
right?
is elf. I
Brown
mean,
furry
that's
guy, long nose. Understand?
yeah, yeah, no. Oh my gosh. Corporate media and what they've done to mythology. Um, no, but Alf he's the king of the Alfs, of the elves. And
Elves,
so from
elfin.
the very
Yeah,
beginning you get that. But then the idea of that eating of the star, that,
yeah.
which as a matter of fact, in this article back here, they use the image that Tolkien himself created, which I think is kind of cool. They use this image, to
That's the
illustrate.
star.
Yep.
That's the
At
star
least
piece.
that's what they do for reference. They put this
Yes.
thing in here. This is Arundel's
Yeah.
device from the Silmarillion. But
Exactly.
yeah,
That's what I was going to say. Point out that that's that that's all of that stuff, because Arundel is of course the star that he is. He is the Silmaril. That's the star that
Yeah,
guides the sun and the moon,
yeah,
heralding the dawn. It's so many things, which in itself draws its inspiration from the originally Arundel, the old Anglo-Saxon poem,
right.
um, which is referring to both Christ and the Northern Star that heralds Christ and so
But
on. So
I
he
think it's really
swallows
fascinating.
the star. I think it's
Yeah.
brilliant,
Yeah,
absolutely
it's brilliant.
brilliant.
And I think it's fascinating that he has this. First off, there are a lot of different images in Smith that are you see coming up in Lord of the Rings, for instance. So, like, there's a scene where Smith
Yes.
has to give up the star to Alf again, and he says, shouldn't I be able to keep it? It's mine. I inherited it." I mean, that's Bilbo giving up the ring, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's another point where he engages in a dance with the fairies, and the
Yeah.
woman he dances with turns out to be the fairy queen. And it's very much like that Hobbit scene where they go off the rails trying to get to the elf merrymaking in the woods there in the
Right.
forest. So you get these parallels. So, and this is written after those works. So
Yeah.
Tolkien was not making it up here and then putting it into the later works. I think he was making reference back to his own work to some degree. There's a certain self-referential quality. Maybe because what he was reflecting on, maybe, is that images like the ring or images like that elf circle there in The Hobbit
Mhm.
are images of eternal phenomena that show up over and over again.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's not that the star is the same as the ring. It's not that. It's that they have
Mhm.
similar qualities in terms of our attraction to them, our wanting to keep them, our desire as humans for permanence, which is kind of a startling thing if you go back to what we're reading now. Humans, I think, desire permanence, maybe more than
Mhm.
elves, maybe perhaps because of our transitory nature. We don't like to move. I speak from experience.
Yeah.
We don't like to have things different. We want that permanence all the time. And so when something is asked to be rendered back to its original owner, especially a talent or a life or what have you, we have a hard time, I think, doing that. So
Yeah.
it's a universal phenomenon throughout human history. But one more thing before I shut up. I really like this image of the consuming of the star and the fact that
Mhm.
Smith, who's the little boy when he eats the star, it grows in him, so to speak, and comes out like a third eye. The concept of the third eye in Eastern
Right.
mythology, for instance, is very much reflected here. The star shines on his forehead, and some people can see it, some cannot, but it also makes his eyes bright. It makes him more merry when it's shining. But
Right.
that
People could
whole
just
image
listen
of
to him
eating,
talk for hours.
yeah, like you can listen to me talk for hours, right?
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
I'll go on and on and on. No, but it's very much like the image of from the book of Revelation, where he's given the hot coal to purify his tongue, or when it says he ate the
Yes.
word of God and it tasted bitter at first, but then was like honey on the tongue.
Hmm.
It's a very similar image that we consume something like consuming food, and it goes into us and makes us different as a human being. Like even the eating of
Right.
the apple fig at Genesis is like that.
Hmm.
It's not so much that they just ate a fruit and God's like, okay, arbitrarily you're out. It's
Right.
representative of something.
Because
So very much in this story too, that he consumes this thing, this star, and that raises the question then, what is going on? What is being imagined here in this image?
mm,
And then why a star? Why not like the baby Jesus, like at the Mardi Gras party, for instance, where you find the baby Jesus in the cake or something like that?
right.
Why not a coin?
Well, so two, a couple of the coin is interesting. Um, the baby Jesus in a cake, I think originally was a star in some
Mm,
traditions. Interestingly enough, because it's something you eat at Epiphany,
mm,
in certain cultures. But that's, I suppose, neither here nor there. Um, but yeah, the eating of the thing. Why a star? why not? I mean, why not a little tree? Why not a seed? Why not just
Yeah,
a
right.
magic spice? Obviously, a baby Jesus thing would be exactly the George MacDonald kind of, you know, bit that he's trying to write a contrary to. So it's a better way. And as you know, Clive was really into this. George MacDonald, right? Clive Staples Lewis writes his, if you will, his equivalent of Smith Wood, which is The Great Divorce, right?
Oh,
Here's a
okay.
fellow who kind of stumbles into a strange land, and it turns out it's kind of the twilight zone between heaven and earth, or between heaven and hell. And he's taken a little journey, and there's straight, he's the grass is more solid than he is, so it kind of pierces through his feet, and he has some encounters with you know falling leaves, flowers, wind, what that are they're actually reminiscent of Smith of Wood and Nature in some ways. Um, but his guide in this, the very Virgilian Dantesque kind of thing, is George MacDonald. Just straight up, it's George MacDonald Ghost
Yeah, right.
showing him around, and so he's very much, you know, Lewis is very much more aligned with George MacDonald on this, and this is the classic divide between Tolkien and Lewis. In any case, it's very allegorical, very strict, a bit rather preachy. Um, whereas Tolkien is engaging in real myth. Not that Lewis doesn't do that; he just doesn't usually do that.
Yeah.
But you have them eating a star, and for Tolkien, then I mean, we're going to look like what is a star? Let's look at the other ways that he uses stars. Trees are very important. Well, trees are like men. Men are like trees. But a star
Mm,
is something from above, and we see the way that he uses the image of the star in Lord of the Rings, for example. Um, Anything from the dark despair of Sam and Frodo in the plains of Gorgoroth, looking up and seeing for a brief moment there was a parting of the clouds, and he sees a star beyond, above, beyond all of this darkness right now. The stars are still shining. There's still hope. There's a whole world outside of this. What really is, a petty blotch on the bigger picture.
yeah.
Um, and so that star can be a redeeming thing. It can be a powerful thing. It can enter in and transform. It can chase away Shelob, right? The light from the star of Arendelle, which is this star right here we're looking at.
Right.
The light from that star is what's captured in the Phial of Galadriel, and that's what drives away Shelob. That's what gives an interior light and strength and fairiness, elvishness to Samwise himself, the most unlikely of characters, right? Even less likely than Bilbo finding the ring is Sam storming a castle full of orcs to go rescue his master, and the orcs running away.
Mm,
And the power of the star, why? Because that's the power of the star active in him. He didn't
yeah.
consume it in this way, but he's holding it to his breast. It's glowing from within. He himself becomes radiant in a way that I think is really similar. It's the same kind of phenomenon, right? That there's this star, a fairy power glowing within you that transforms you to be a different kind of thing,
Right. Right.
both active in young Smith and in Samwise.
And what we're talking about is, I think, whatever the thing is that prompts the young child to begin thinking about worlds beyond the physical and beyond the mundane and the I don't know what the word is exactly. The nominalist. There, we use that word. How about
Yes.
that? The nominalist, just a random word. The nominalist vision, which is that everything is just what we see in 3 feet around us. I can envision Tolkien, even as a young man, hearing that poem or reading that poem of Arendelle, which is
Mm-hmm.
Star in the East, the Christmas song, and it sticking with him as a sort of memory of childhood joy that then flourishes as he grows older and he goes through World War I and all the stuff that he deals with afterwards. That somehow there's this memory of something else that's brighter and higher and more beautiful than, as you said, the mundane sort of blackened hills that we have to deal with here.
Mm-hmm.
It begs a bigger question, which is why have humans from as far back as Neolithic ages used stars as images for this sort of thing, for brightness and
Mm-hmm.
for encouragement and for guidance. It's only recently that when we look up, we see big balls of gas, millions of light years away. Now, it's a very recent phenomenon, and it's a much that vision that I just described is like Neil deGrasse Tyson or like Elon Musk or something. We just have to go to those stars because they're just another big ball of gas where we can survive. But it's mere survival. It's mere like materialism. It's not anymore the desire or the hope for the longing or the joy or the guidance or the brilliance or the beauty. It's none of that. It's purely reduced to the nominalist vision that a star is just a gas ball of hydro whatever
Hmm.
hydrogen and all. Um, so like I'm looking at this picture here of the Star of Arundel, the shield that he uses. And I can't help but bring this up, so please bear with me. The geometric image that he uses at the very center is the Star of David.
Hmm.
It's a six-pointed star. And Tolkien, although he wasn't a geometer and he wasn't a mathematician, seems to have been fascinated by this use of geometry.
I dare say he was. And I want to point out one, it's not a correction, but a further point, literally, is that it's not merely the six-pointed star, but there's an additional point that we see, and that's that dot in the middle is meant to, with
Hmm.
the hexagonal framing, is meant to be a three-dimensional point coming up towards us. So in some ways,
Mm,
he's given us an image of I suppose, an octahedron. Is that what that,
yeah,
with the points
I guess it
that
would
I
be.
know, Ken,
I
right?
guess it would be.
Um, and so it's at one and the same time, yes, a six-pointed star, two-dimensionally. We see 7 points, but it's really, but if you
Other
know
side.
how to look beyond what you cannot see to understand what is necessary to see without sight, what is on the other side, then you know that it's in fact an eight-pointed star,
8 pointed,
which
yeah.
is just good Semitic rhetoric. It's 6 points. Here are the seven. I'm going to tell you eight of them.
Yeah,
To expand, boom, 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 like that.
yeah. And that's interesting too, because I can't but think Tolkien was at least thinking about that idea. Um, why else would he have a 24-year cake, which is
No,
three
yeah,
eighths?
exactly right.
Three eighths,
Exactly.
right?
3/8,
Um,
24 year cake. Let's do 12. And think about that. There's a special kind of party you have only every 24 years. But that's just pretty cool. Like a
yeah,
jubilee,
yeah, it is.
like a
Yeah,
real
right. Yeah,
jubilee, like back, in
yeah.
the traditional sense that they never did, but they were supposed to.
But I think one of the things that fascinates people that are steeped in this kind of mathematical thought is that they don't do it just because it's a form of accounting. They
No,
do
of
it
course not.
because they're fascinated, or I don't know if fascinated is the right word. They see it as a way of probing into that realm which undergirds the 3 foot world that most of us tend to live in.
Hmm.
There's something else there. Some other pattern or image or idea that becomes manifest in a very beautiful way. I think that most geometers, most people that study gematria or who study isopsaphia or things like that, they're studying it because it's another form of this beauty. Now, that's not to say that Tolkien is an isopsaphiist or that he is a member of the Eleusinian Mysteries or anything like that. It's just to say I think Tolkien is thinking about the same type of thing that those people are thinking of, which is there's something beyond this world, and he's utterly convinced of it. And it's when you tap into that idea that there's something else besides the 9 to 5 job. There's something else besides the daily grind or the worship of money and finance. When you tap into that, well, then you're starting to tap into the realm of fairy. You're starting to have that image grow in you of the star, which is the third eye. We might call that, if it weren't such a trite phrase, we might call that a spiritual life.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. And for what it's worth, further elaboration on this very theme that you're discussing and how it is connected to seemingly mundane things of everyday life. Actually, you can the first half of King Charles's book. written as Prince Charles, harmony. He actually really does a really nice job summarizing, giving an overview of these very things, in terms of patterns and harmony in the universe, in man, and so on. And then moves to the second half is about practical application, but the first half is very interesting in that respect as well.
Well,
What do you think?
and
Yeah, the
that's
pattern.
called
Maybe there's
Harmony.
something. It
Is
called
that the new?
Harmony.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, by Prince Charles, now King Charles. Harmony, really worthwhile. You can even get the audio version read by him if you happen to be one of those people enchanted by his particular manners of speech. It's really quite charming.
So somewhat British.
Yeah.
But it occurs to me in this too, because I am going to be teaching the Farmer Giles back to back to the Smith Wooten Major, that to some reckoning, they seem to be two sides of a same coin. And what I mean by that is I think that the Smith, is talking about that other realm and that journey into fairy and how important it is and how it's passed on one to the next, almost like a kingship, like an
Yep.
inheritance of kingship to only a select few, not to everybody, but that
Right.
king ends up coming back and becoming the nourisher of the culture, the chef, the cook.
Yes.
But the other story, that's the Pharmacos of Ham, you said is more a surface level. I think you're right, but I can't help but think that it's intentionally so. And it's
Yes.
intentionally
I
comical, intentionally
yes.
comical, because I tend to think that both of them, they're not a direct response. In other words, he's not sitting down thinking, I'm going to write against progressivism. But I can't help but think that he was thinking about the realm of fairy and art and beauty in response to this other vision of the world as a 3-foot prison,
Yes.
which is what
Absolutely.
progressivism comes down to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
I think if he's not sitting down to say, I'm going to write about that, it's because his whole life work was a
yeah,
response to
right.
that,
Yes.
was an
Yes.
alternative,
Yes.
showing a way out.
So his response, for instance, to the saccharine nature, as this article was saying, this response to the saccharine nature of most fairy stories is really a response to a sort of modernistic view of what these stories were, and a
Yes.
reduction of them, even done by good people like Andrew Lang and the Grimm brothers, to purely
Right.
scientific form of
Yes.
study.
Right. Right. I think that's
Anthropological
absolutely
sort
right.
of, this is human culture, isn't it nice and quaint? And now we've got it in
Putting
a
it
box.
putting it under the microscope and dissecting it, thus depriving it of the very life that gave
Right,
it the power, that
right.
allows it to have power for us. And I think it's absolutely right. And I think when it comes to Farmer Giles, yeah, I think it is a nice pairing, because like you said, it's intentionally so a surface level kind of thing, um, rich with humor, philology humor.
Mm,
Intentionally funny, a bit of buffoonery, and very like vulgar,
yes.
self-consciously vulgar, because he's always saying, or in the vulgar tongue, it's said this way, um, because it's otherwise too hard a pill to swallow. Uh, if you were to just strip it of that, and you'd have just a bare political treatise, which is, in my opinion,
Right.
precisely what it is.
I agree.
Um, which the problem with the modern world is that politics is treated far too seriously and
Oh,
um,
yeah.
not seen with such jocularity as is necessary in order to do it
Yeah.
well. Um, and so, but it is against progressivism. Even this bit, the second chapter in, if I just to come back to Smith of Witton Major, um, there's these subtle things, and it's throughout, and it's all of it. You see this in all of them, both texts quite explicitly, um, very explicitly in Farmer Giles of Ham. They're always poking at the way things used to be versus what we're able to do now.
Mm.
Um, but things come round in the end, so it's not a detraction story. But even here, the in the Smithwood Major, the cook's house and the kitchen adjoined the great hall. So we're talking about the layout of the town, the village of Witton Major. They adjoined the great hall, the largest and oldest building in the place, and the most beautiful. It was built of good stone and good oak, and was well tended, though it was no longer painted or gilded as it had been once upon a time. In the hall, the villagers held their meetings and debates, and their public feasts, and their family gatherings, and so on. And it's just this subtle little phrase. it's essentially they're less civilized than they used to be.
Mm.
And Gimli the dwarf says it very starkly after the war is won and they're wandering through Gondor, right? There's the good stone, and then there's the mediocre stone, and then there's the bad stone. The good stone being the oldest, and so on. And so it is with men. But Legolas and he have a philosophical debate about man's actual potential for Renaissance. But Tolkien's works are peppered with this. He makes an explicit object of jocularity and playing around in Farmer Giles of Ham, but also here he gives a subtle hint to that things aren't just every day and every way getting better and better. There are rises and falls of
Right.
society, and he gives a hint here that we've fallen from where we were as a culture. This culture here, which already seems quaint and antiquated to us, was a greater civilization at some point with gilded hall. For all we know, this actually was Hilrot at some point, right? And it's now
Yeah.
been repurposed as like the town festival,
Yeah.
banqueting center.
Yeah.
Um,
The
but
visitor center.
as we see, it's the visitor center. But as we see at the end, it actually gets painted again and becomes
Hmm.
colorful again. And this is some of the things, burning uh, the fact that Notre Dame, right, the fire on Notre Dame,
Yeah.
woke up most of nobody outside of a few specialists who happen to know about the architecture of times and all this, are aware that this church and many churches like it were painted inside. They were brightly colored. They weren't dark Gothic buildings like we tend to think of them
Hmm.
after
Hmm.
centuries of essentially neglect and buildup of soot. But they were bright and colorful, and he gives that. And in some ways, it's a little scintillation, like the shimmering of a star at the beginning of the story. It's something that has nothing to do with the narrative as such, that reveals to us there is a has been and a will be. It's that Arthurian Rex quondam, Rexque futurus, right? The once and future king kind of principle. Like, we're not the pinnacle of civilization right now. It's perhaps more obvious to most people who pay attention to anything now, more obvious perhaps than it was at the beginning of the 20th century. But things were higher than they were civilizationally, culturally, and it declined. But Tolkien is already in saying that, frames it in a way that, or at least the rest of the story, proposes the idea that there's a way back up again,
Hmm.
essentially.
That I really like that read, because one of the things that I find most distressing about the political climate and about progressivism currently is, first off, they push the narrative that this is the best of times. It can't get any better. We are at the pinnacle of civilization. That's one narrative that's pushed frequently. And all
Mm-hmm.
these stupid people back in the 12 and 1300s were just that. They're backwards, primitive, stupid people. But the second thing that is distressing is that whatever the crisis is du jour is the most important crisis. And we have to take these politics very seriously and finance very seriously. And, we have to be buttoned up and wear our bowler hats to the bank and all that, like in Mary Poppins. And I think that you're very right in saying that Tolkien is suggesting that it's a moment in time. It's not, on the one hand, progressing to better and better and better and better and better things, but it's also not, it's it's transitory. It is a passing
Mm-hmm.
thing, which gives great hope when you start looking at the disasters that are surrounding you and the misery and the awfulness and all the conspiracy, not theories. And you think, wow, this is really bad. Yes, but it's a passing thing. Just like he says again in the Lord of the Rings, right? The darkness cannot triumph forever. The darkness is a passing thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the image of the dragon, which I think his name is Chrysophylax, is that right? Chrysophylax?
Yes,
It's been a while since I've
Chrysophila,
read the story.
golden
Chrysophylax.
wrists.
Is that right? Golden
Yeah,
wrists?
yeah. Because Philax like phylactery, things you tie around your
Oh,
wrists. It's
yeah.
Greek for he's got golden wrists. He's got bangles. He's got dangles that shimmer and shine.
I think it's funny. Well, okay,
Yeah.
so Mr. Bangly Dangly comes into town and he's seeking to break up the joint, right? And if I remember right, doesn't the dog factor
Oh
into
yeah.
chasing him out or something, or taming him by the end?
By taming him, yes, the dog, the yap, who can talk because most dogs could talk back then.
Right.
And it's really a charming read. But yes, the dog plays a key role in doing absolutely diddly squat to subdue the thing. In doing so, does so. I mean, the same way that Farmer Giles. I mean, the opening scene is a giant tramping through and causing havoc.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Just because he's looking for a snack and he lost his way, and Farmer Giles gets his blunderbuss, loads it full of, whatever happens to be on the kitchen counter at the time, blam, and fires it off almost quite by mistake, and it's a blunderbuss because the whole thing is just a blunder. He's not a hero. He's just, God, what do I do? Bam, and shoots this thing off. And a giant, gosh, nasty, unhealthy parts, biting
Right. There are
flies,
mosquitoes
and just
here.
kind of, yeah, it's mosquitoes. I'm just gonna wander on my way a different direction, like you do. He's not, and everybody's, yeah, he chased away the giant. It's all just this hilarious. I mean, yeah, it's just that. And but that in being totally farcical, unintended consequences of just tomfoolery is exactly what moves forward the plot, but what moves forward the restoration of the rightful king, as it
Yeah.
were. The good
Yeah.
king, the restoration of the figure of the good king
Oh, that's
over
right.
the
That's
wonderful
right.
people
That's
of
right.
Ham,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Farmer Giles becomes
Yeah.
king,
Yeah.
not
Well,
due to his
that's
wits or
interesting.
merit, because of that's the way it happened.
Yeah. Right. I've forgotten that when we look at a character like a giant or a dragon, there's something particular about both of them is that they're big. They're big, huge
Yeah.
characters. So the giant, which is more human-like, is more like human ego almost blown out of proportion. And the dragon is almost like something otherworldly. It's almost a demonic thing
Yep.
in a way.
It's
Balrog.
more demonic. They're subtle, right?
Yeah,
They can reason and wit without
right.
conscience.
Right. So it's not, I don't think it's a direct parallel necessarily to, but I think it can be taken as two events that occurred right around the turn of the century, which that we could say, well, one was giant-like and one was dragon-like. The whole idea of national pride that led to World War One, for instance, is very much this like this gigantic human ego thundering
Yeah,
around and
exactly.
poking each other in
Oh,
the
it's
eyeball.
my
You're a
big stick,
booby
and I'm going to
bird,
hit
and
you
I've
with.
said it before, and I won't
That's
take that
right.
off you, Tom.
Essentially, it's the Triple Alliance. Is the three the
It's a
three
triple
trolls.
alliance of boink. Three Stooges. Um, and so, it's made comical in the story
Yeah.
because if you take it too seriously, I mean, if you really start looking at the deaths of World War One and the misery that occurred because of the Franco-Prussian War, it is a depressing series of
Hmm.
of events. To read Barbara Tuchman, for instance, and her Guns of August, it's like, wow, that's some depressing stuff. Um, but if it's just a big blundering giant, in a way, you could put it in its place. It's no longer fearful. It's no longer the worst thing ever. It's just one more dumb blundering giant. And I think the same
Hmm.
thing too can be said, although it's not an identity because it's not. We're not talking allegory here because he hated that
Right.
stuff. You could say that the whole rise of the intellectual disease of progressivism,
Hmm.
that humans are a mistake to be fixed, basically, by science and
Right.
reason, is
Right.
dragon-like,
Yes.
you know.
I think it's absolutely right.
And if
I think it's
and if
absolutely
and,
right.
and if it's nothing more than Mr. Dangly Bangly wrists or whatever, Mr. Golden wrists, then you could see it as being kind of comical in a way. What
Right.
the more that I find the progressives have done during the 20th century is horrific. The whole Tuskegee experiment
Mm.
or the
Hmm.
castration of certain people or the killing of whole generations there, Auschwitz and like, and on and
Yeah.
on and on. It is a depressing, horrible, awful business. And yet, if it's just another dragon that's come into the realm, and one with a really funny name, you
Hmm.
kind of laugh at it and say, "Well, you have no power over me here."
Exactly.
It's no longer a Nazgul. It's
Yeah. It's just a barrel white to be shooed away by Tom Bombadil and
yeah,
smacked
right,
out
yeah,
like a spider
yeah,
crawling
exactly,
across the
yeah,
floor.
yeah, yeah. which I don't know whether that story was written near the end of his life too, but it seems almost to be that like not a counterweight, but a parallel story to what goes on in
Yeah,
Van Smith of Wooten Major. Um, I think once again, Tolkien keeping the eyes clear as to what we're about as humans, so we don't fall into the
yeah.
sense of, this is the end all and be all.
That's
So,
exactly right. Exactly right.
well, it's a good place to end for us, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a
All
good
right. Well, thank
discussion.
you,
Thank
sir.
you.
That's a good
Thank you so
discussion.
much. I really appreciated this today. So,
Yeah,
maybe we could do this similar thing next week too.
I think we should. And if I could offer a suggestion, just I was kind of skimming both front pages, I think we could go through Smith and Wooten Major and the coming of men into the West and look at them as this two perspectives on the same phenomenon of man's encounter with
Sure.
fairy. Because we have the awakening of speech in men, with Felagund comes singing to them, and we also have then the awakening of young Smithson, and then going into fairy and some of these interactions.
Yeah.
It could be
Yeah.
interesting to explore how that goes.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that next time. Sounds good. All
Okay,
right. Thank you, sir.
cool.
Take care of yourself.
All right, thanks. You too.